Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much to Shelley and Danny for always opening up their home to us. This morning's class, Leilui Nishmat Mordechai ben Rahel, Alav Shalom, as well as the Fu'ah Shelema Shoshana bat Margalit, Yaakov ben Me'ah, and Meir ben Mazal. So, and any other names if you'd like to add them. Okay. All right. First of all, this is by far the nicest view I've ever had giving a class. Yes. And as Julie and I were going back and forth, I made sure nobody would be facing that way, because otherwise, who's going to want to listen to anything that I have to say at that point? So, I've often asked myself the question, everybody is in some kind of a profession. Everybody sells something. Everybody is in some kind of a business. I've often thought myself, like, what kind of business am I in? What kind of profession do I do? I'm a rabbi, but what am I selling? What am I marketing off to people? And you could say maybe it's religion. I'm a teacher. I sell education. But when I really stop and think about the job that I do and what my day-to-day time is really taken up with, of course, it's teaching Torah and instructing people on mitzvot. But perhaps the most important thing that I handle is I think I'm in the relationship business. People business, right? Which is to say that I use Torah and the wisdom of our Hachamim to try and help people to navigate relationships, because life in general is all about relationships. And we have so many different kinds of relationships, whether it's peer relationships with friends, whether it's family relationships, be it a spouse, sibling, child, a parent, or our relationship with Hashem. In the end of the day, our faith and the way we go about living our lives day to day is also in a relationship with Hashem. And sometimes people don't think about that all the time because, Hashem doesn't necessarily talk back to us directly or communicate with us directly, but we're no doubt in a relationship with Hashem the same way we're in a relationship with our peers, with our family, friends, and so on. So relationships are really everything. And what makes life sometimes difficult is having to deal with conflict in that relationship. So we talked last week that we're coming close to the time of year of repentance, of Teshuvah, of the high holidays. We talked a lot about forgiveness, how we open up our hearts to forgive others. We touched a little bit, but we'll have another class on what we need to do to ask for forgiveness. And I think we're going to touch on that a little bit today. But really what I think we're trying to figure out at this time of year, and what makes this time of year so tense and sometimes a little uncomfortable, is how do we deal with conflicts in our relationships, both with our relationship with Hashem that might be in disrepair, that needs to be fixed and mended and brought back together, as well as our relationship with other people in our lives, those who are close, those who might be a little bit more distant. And that's really what this time period is all about. It's all about trying to figure out how we navigate those relationships. And so that's what I want to talk about today. I want to try to talk about why it is that we sometimes avoid conflict, why we have a hard time dealing with struggles with other people, and what maybe confrontation could actually do for us while that word makes us maybe a little bit nervous, confronting others or confronting ourselves or even confronting Hashem. That makes us nervous, but why it's such a necessary part of the process of forgiveness, of growth, and of repairing some of those relationships. So I'll throw out the question, and before I throw out the question, I'll say that one of the major issues that I see in a very young career, when people don't get along, when a husband and wife are struggling in their relationship, or a parent and child aren't seeing eye to eye, is that they have what we call conflict avoidance. They don't want to deal with the issues that are going on between them. So I'll just portray a very light, very not serious scenario to kind of illustrate my point. One of the worst questions that I get on a day-to-day basis is when my wife calls me and says, "What do you want for dinner?" Okay, that's by far the worst question. I hate that question. And no matter how many times I tell her, stop, just make everything you make is great. No, but what do you want for dinner? Right? And I know that whatever I say, she's going to make something different. So, because I don't have that in the house and whatever it might be. So, imagine you have a husband and wife, right? Spouse, And the wife turns to the husband. Okay, we'll call the wife Sarah. Sarah says to her husband, Joe, I'd love to go out for pizza tonight. What do you say? Let's go out for pizza. Joe doesn't really want to go out for pizza. He's not feeling it. He's not in the mood. He wants to go for Chinese, or he wants to go for a salad or something like that. And so what does Joe do at that point? What does he say to his wife? His wife suggests something. He doesn't want to do it. How does he handle that situation? He would love pizza, right? So that's what tends to sometimes happen, right? The husband is thinking to himself, at this point, I have a few different options. I could say, I don't really like pizza. Let's choose something else. Or I'd like to go here. Or this is what my wife wants. Let me just make her happy. And sure, no problem. You go pick up the pizza, or I'll go pick it up, and we'll go and we'll eat, right? And I tend to think something, okay, you're saying, Rabbi, it's a very silly example, but watch how it plays out. So the husband says, sure, honey, no problem. Let's get pizza. Now, how does that situation continue to evolve, right? What did the husband just do by saying to his wife, yes, I'll do this, without saying what his reservations of it are? What did he just do? He avoided the conflict, right? Conflict is still there, right? He doesn't want to say anything because he doesn't want to have the conflict out in the open, but the conflict doesn't go away, does it, right? What did he just do? He internalized the conflict. He just took the conflict and put it inside of him, right? And bottled it up and held it there. And now that starts to build. Chances are they bring home the pizza. The wife is grinning from ear to ear. She's so happy. They have pizza, and he's like a little lukewarm about it. He makes a face. He's doing this. He's trying to hide it, but he's not trying to hide it at the same time. And the night, he doesn't want to ruin the night, but essentially the night gets ruined anyway because he's doing something, and he didn't get himself to express what it really was that he wanted. They didn't have to deal with that conflict. And we think that not dealing with the conflict is going to make our life easier, but if only we realize that it's actually making ourselves more complicated. Now that's a silly example, pizza, okay, dinner. But you can imagine how taking that example, and that's one of, let's say, 100 different decisions that happen on a daily basis between a person and somebody else, whether it's their spouse, their child, their parent, et cetera, and you continue to conflict avoid, you continue to internalize, you continue to people please, what happens to the individual? It builds up, and you start to what? Start to resent. There starts to be a lot of resentment. What did you say? All right. So you start to, you're getting ready to erupt, right? So what you're really feeling at that point is those feelings start to bottle up, and you feel like I'm not as important in this relationship, right? So I give in to my spouse one time, I give in to my spouse a second time, a third time, and I'm not expressing anything, and I'm just taking it. And so I'm starting to internalize all of that conflict instead of getting it out. And as a result, all that resentment is building up. And I'm thinking that I'm avoiding, but it's only making the situation that much worse. And the worst part of it is the other person on the other end has no clue what's happening. They know nothing. They think everything's smooth sailing. They had a great time. They ate the pizza. They had fun. Everything was fine. And so now you have two people that are growing apart from each other in this relationship because one is internalizing all the conflict and is starting to feel like they're not important in the relationship. I'm always the one who gets the second fiddle as opposed to the other one who always gets what they want. And the person who quote unquote always gets what they want has no clue that any of this is going on. And this builds and it builds and it builds until, as you said, like a volcano, it erupts or it starts to, and the other person gets blindsided. And this is where major tension and major conflict starts to grow, and then shalom bayit issues ensue, or if it's a child and a parent, they start to not see eye to eye, and there's rebel, and it gets totally out of hand. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, why do we avoid that conflict like that? Because we all see this happening, and we all realize that that's not something that we want. Yet time and again, when we're faced with a situation, say something, don't say something, address the conflict, don't address it. Many of us will just say, it's not worth it. Let me just hold it. But the conflict's not going away. It's still there, and it's hurting us and hurting the relationship. Why do we avoid it? Thoughts?
Something as simple as, let's say, for example, saying, okay, the pizza guy, and he feels like not such a big bad. But I guess what you're saying is that when there's a lot of these
Right.
But I guess it's.
See, but you said in two interesting things. You said pick your battles. So sometimes that's true. Sometimes I don't want to have that. I thinking to myself, it's just easier for me to accept it instead of having to have that conversation. What we don't realize is it's something that the rabbis call derech ktsara shehi aruka. It's the short way, which actually becomes the long way, right? You think this is just going to end it, but in actuality, it only builds and it becomes more of a problem down the road. Then instead of facing it at a small situation, which might be derech aruka, might be longer now, but actually saves me time on the back end, right? Now you're saying it might be easier, but then you said something else. It's about compromise. How can I compromise with the person if I don't tell them what's bothering me? In that pizza example, there could be a compromise, but the spouse who said, let's have pizza, the other one who said, okay, doesn't think there's a need for compromise. My spouse said, okay, right? If I don't express what I'm feeling, if I don't say why that I don't like that, or I'd rather do this, or what, how is there room for compromise? There's no compromise whatsoever. I compromised myself, but we didn't compromise together. And because we didn't compromise together, the relationship did not grow. In fact, it grew further apart, right? So in that situation, silly an example as it is, the husband might turn around and say, pizza, I've liked pizza in the past, but I'm not feeling so much in the mood for pizza. I don't know, maybe there's somewhere we can get a pizza and a salad. Maybe there's somewhere we can go that I could find a piece of fish also. Is there a pizza place that could also provide this for me? All of a sudden, you now have a conversation in which the other spouse is saying, okay, my spouse doesn't really want pizza tonight for dinner, but I do. How do we navigate that? And again, it's a silly example but it could play out on a much larger level that if I can represent myself in a certain way, now there's a room for compromise. And the more times you actually come to a compromise, the stronger the relationship grows, right? Becomes. When you don't have that, when one person is always taking the internal conflict as opposed to the other, the relationship actually grows apart and the conflict continues to build up and rise up. Other thoughts about why we might avoid conflict? Happened until last night. The pizza salad thing, was it the pizza? It was Chinese food. I'm not that far over. It's not that silly, right? It's not that silly. So that's a good opportunity. You brought it together. You were able to find a middle ground approach, and it feels good at the end of the day, right? And you feel like, hey, if I can navigate some of those silly day-to-day things, then I'm prepared for something a little bit larger. Esther, you're going to say something about why we avoid conflict.
We don't want to be vulnerable. It turns into, you address it, and then if it explodes back in your face, you're like, all right, I don't want to do that anymore.
Right. So we were nervous about where it could potentially go, and we don't want the headache sometimes.
No, I was just going to ask, is it an example that I find like sometimes it's just not.
Right. Sometimes it's not worth, but the question is if something is not worth it every single day, over and over again, after a while you start to feel like, I know these things are all silly, but they add up, right? Am I worth it in the relationship? Do I not get a say in certain things, right? Right. So for sure, I'm not suggesting that you need to make a blow up every time we can't figure out what's for dinner, right? I'm just giving a small example though, that over time and as the examples get a little bit bigger, like what school to send our kids to, or what programs to put them in, or my son or daughter's dating and one spouse likes the family, one spouse doesn't really love the family. Now we're having a situation, what do we do? As the conflicts get a little bit, more significant, at least in our eyes, all of a sudden now we have to figure out how we're going to communicate. And if you're in the habit of internalizing conflict or one side always versus the other, then you start to internalize conflict in situations where it can be really, really detrimental, right? Another reason why I think we avoid conflict is because we want to be liked, right? Everybody wants to be liked, right? And the more conflicting a person you are, right? If everyone knows, oh, this person is always so difficult to deal with, right? They're always raising issues, the less liked we are, right? The more we engage in conflict, the more people try to stay away from us because they don't want to deal with it either. So we avoid conflict because we just want to be liked. So we think that if we please others, even at our own expense, we'll be more liked, right? But it's always better to be respected than to be liked. It's a very interesting theory, right? So yes, people will like you a lot more, but they won't really respect you as much because a person who's constantly pleasing other people doesn't stand for anything, doesn't have any values, right? Imagine if every single person who asked me a question, the answer was, yes, you could do that, right? I mean, it'd be a dream for the congregants. They would love it, right? To have a rabbi that says yes to everything, right? But if I'm a people pleaser, someone comes to me with a difficult kashrut question, and I want them to be happy with the answer instead of giving them the truth about what the law requires them to do. So I'll be very well liked, but eventually people will start to realize this is not a person I can trust. This is not somebody who I'm going to come to for a real question. It's not somebody that I really respect because the job of a rabbi in the end of the day, while people might be disappointed with the answers that I give them sometimes, the job of a rabbi is not to be liked by people, is to give them the information that's going to be useful for them to navigate their lives. And in the end of the day, when you're respected and people look up to you, you'll become more liked, right? In the end of the day, it will actually lead to you being liked because the people will say, wow, this person has values. He stands for something. He or she is not willing to compromise who they are just to make me happy. And people tend to, even though in the moment they don't love that all the time, in the long run, they will actually gravitate to you much, much more, right? So
when you
yeah.
deliver it,
So that's what I want to talk a little bit about. Yeah.
if you're gonna give that answer that someone's not gonna really like, it all depends on how you deliver it to them. You deliver it saying, no, you can't do that.
Right.
You're gonna walk away
Right.
angry and upset.
Yeah.
Or if
Yeah.
you
So
walk
sometimes we
away
have to have that
upset,
conversation of, well, explain to me what's happening. Well, maybe you could do this. Maybe you could try that. I see something here, but really this you can't do. And if people start to see you're willing to work with them on situations and converse with them back and forth, they're much more open-minded to that. So yeah. Yeah.
Or how do you say, like, this is a client? One thing, but I mean,
So that's an excellent question. I don't know that there's a guaranteed blueprint, but I think your feelings will tell you a lot about where it's going to go. Because if in the end of the day, the pizza salad argument, you end up getting the pizza and you're fine, you feel okay, you end up eating the pizza and you're just as happy. Obviously, it wasn't that important, even though maybe you wanted the salad or something else, you're willing to compromise, you're willing to forget about it and you can move on. So if you could release it from you and you don't feel anything, any harbor, any of that resentment, then fine. It means the thing was small enough that I didn't need to make a conflict about it and I'm okay with it, right? But if the whole time you're eating that pizza and you're thinking to yourself, really, I hate this pizza, right? And you're staring at your wife on the other side of the table going, she made me have pizza again, right? And you're feeling that something to that degree on the inside, that's a signal for you that I gotta speak up. I have to be honest. And although honesty is challenging at times because again, it puts me in that vulnerable position, it means the other person might not like me in the short term right away. Honesty is the best policy. In the end of the day, the person will respect you more for putting the conflict out, and now you're able to resolve it and compromise, and the person feels like, I know where I stand with this person. There's nothing worse, I feel like, in a relationship than not knowing where that relationship is, right? Where do I stand with that person is a very frustrating, very difficult feeling. Then, okay, maybe we're not best friends, but I know where we stand, right? I know where we stand. Because you're not going to be best friends with every single person. You're not going to invite every single person to your house. And that's okay. Nobody says that you have to. You need to respect everybody. You need to show them proper kavod and dignity and so on. But not my inner circle is not going to be 1,000 people. It's going to be a handful of select people who I know. But knowing where I stand with a relationship with somebody, in my opinion, is much, much more satisfying, I guess you could say, than it is feeling like, do they like me? Don't they like me? I feel like it's maybe this, maybe that, but there's no honesty in the relationship, so nobody knows what's going on. That becomes very, very frustrating to navigate. You going to say something, Julie?
You're expressing your honesty a little bit too much. Not everything has to be talked out, and not everything, because then I feel like that might wear on the other person in the relationship.
Right.
That everything becomes an issue.
Fine.
So I think there has to be some healthy amount of just sucking things up for peace.
But the question is, but how do you feel about it at the end? That's fine. I could say I'm willing to accept this, right? I want to read to you, now that you brought it up, I want to read to you a quick line from the Rambam. The Rambam writes something about confrontation because there's a mitzvah in the Torah to confront somebody who wronged us, who we might have some ill will or harboring some negative feelings about that person. The Torah says, Lo tisna et achicha bilvavecha. Do not hate your fellow man or woman in your heart, right? To harbor resentment or negative feelings about somebody in your heart is a negative commandment in the Torah. So how do you resolve that? One of the ways to resolve it, the Torah says, is hocheach tochiach et amitecha. You have to confront that person with what they did wrong. You have to say to them, excuse me, you did this to me. It's making me feel really bad about myself. I have a lot of negative feelings about it. I wanted you to know that this is what happened, right? So you have to address that if you're feeling that negativity, and we're going to talk more about the confrontation. But the Rambam writes over here, I'll read to you the words. Somebody whose friend did something wrong to them. They don't want to tell them about it. They don't want to confront the situation. Like you said, maybe they've made the decision that it's not worth picking my battle. They're not going to listen to me. I really want to just move on from it. I'm not interested in picking up the phone and having that conversation. He doesn't want to speak about them to the person. Maybe he says it's not worth it for me and this person. They're not somebody who I really have a deep admiration for, not somebody I want to have that conversation. Or maybe that other person is not really in their right mind. They're not thinking clearly. So even a conversation that I have with them, it's not really going to go anywhere. That's fine. But you have to do one thing, says the Rambam. Mahalo belibo. You have to let it go in your heart. You have to velo sitamo. You cannot harbor that feeling. Velo hochiho, and you don't rebuke them. Harezo midat hasidu. That's the way of the pious people. Yes, and you could do this. It doesn't mean just in silly things. You could do this in bigger things also. If you have the capacity when somebody does something wrong to you, to end up saying, you know what, it's really not worth it. I don't think that person's going to hear me. I don't really want to spend my time and energy or waste it. My wife tells me the person's living rent-free in your head. That's the phrase that she likes to use. Why are you letting this person live rent-free in your head? Get it out, right? So let it go. If you have the ability to do that, if you have the ability to say, it's not worth my time and energy, it's not worth my frustration, I let it go and I forgive that person. I harbor no ill will towards that person. The next time I see them, I think nothing negative of them. If you have the ability to do that, that's the way of the pious people. That's great. It's much harder, right? But if you're letting things go and in the back of your mind, you're feeling that voice knocking on the back, then the answer is, in my opinion, there's nothing too small to bring up, to be honest with you. And I know it sounds crazy, but if that's really something that's irking you, that's gnawing away at you, it's going to keep going and going and going, and it's only going to get bigger. And by the time you're really to recognize it, it's too late already. You're too emotional. You're too pent up about it to be able to handle it in a healthy way. So better to nip it early on when you could do it in a calm, rational, healthy way than to let it build up. And to me, at that point, if it's really going to be resentful to you, there's nothing too small that's really worth bringing up. Then you have to ask yourself a separate question, which is, why am I letting such small things get the better of me? That's a personal thing that you have to answer and deal with. Why am I so uptight? Why am I letting these little insignificant things? Why am I not being somebody who could be more, we call it in Hebrew, mivater, like letting things go? Why can't I let it go? That's a personal conversation, something that you have to reflect on for yourself and ask yourself that question. And that might be a harder character question to go ahead and answer. But as far as your relationships go, if a person is dealing with that struggle, I don't think that bottling it up does any good for the individual whatsoever. In fact, it hurts you and it hurts the person who you're in that relationship with, in my humble opinion. Sure.
It seems like that when there's a small issue that bothers you a lot, it's really much more deeply. It's usually coming from
Somewhere else. Right.
Especially with the spouse.
Right.
So
that's where your personal reflection is going to say to yourself, why are these small things really bothering me so much? I need to ruminate on, there's something deeper going on over here.
Right.
And I have to come to that.
Coming from someone else.
100%.
If you can't figure out what's
No question.
it's something else that's going on in the relationship that you have to figure out.
Right.
You have to, like,
So that means look at that as an opportunity. It's a weird thing to say, but look at that as an opportunity because now you've been gifted an opportunity to solve a problem that you weren't even aware of, but that was there the whole time. And so now, if you're saying to yourself, why is these things bothering me? They seem so petty. I'm letting the petty get involved. That's not the type of person I usually am. It means there's something deeper. Let me attack that. And if I'm able to overcome that, if I'm able to work it out, I'll feel all of a sudden a big burden will be lifted from me and I'll be so much happier. I'll be able to handle this relationship in so much more of a better way. So I want to come to a similar conversation on that. Yeah.
I had another thought about why we would avoid conflict.
Okay.
And it's, what is it going to do to the other person if they address that?
Like what?
For an example, let's say your child is in a situation and you want to say something because not God forbid dangerous or whatever, but you don't know if you say something to the child,
Okay.
it's going to put them in this type of tailspin that you're saying, oh my God, why do I even open my mouth?
Right.
Because whatever. So, you back off a little and you I really maybe shouldn't have been so soft.
Right. So that's fine. I hear that. Timing is a big part of confrontation. There's no question about it, right? So the rabbis in Pirke Abot, this is ultimately a Pirke Abot class, but we've kind of expanded it a little bit. The rabbis in Pirke Avot warn us, don't ask a person for forgiveness while they're still angry at you, right? Never ask a person, please forgive me, I'm sorry, while the person is still angry at you. Your chances of forgiveness, very slim, very slim. Because if anything, what is the person on the other end? Think about a person who one time ever asked you for forgiveness while you were still angry. What's going through your mind at that point? Sorry doesn't cut it, right? Stuff you sorry's in a sack, as they say, right? They might say things that they'll regret. If someone asks me for an apology while I'm still angry, in my opinion, they're not really sorry. They're not really sorry. They just want me to forgive them so that they can move on from it, so that they can feel better about themselves. But if they really cared about it, they wouldn't have asked me for that apology at that time. They would have waited. So if you really want to show that you're sincere in your forgiveness of somebody else and asking forgiveness of somebody, you have to give them a period of time for that anger to subside, right? Then when you come back to them while they're rational, while they're thinking clearly, and you've had a chance to think about it as well, because if you come back to the person in 5 minutes and say, I'm sorry, what are you talking about? You haven't even had a chance to think about it yourself, right? You just want me to say yes so you can move on. It's about you. It's not really about me. It's not really about repairing that relationship. So you really have to give time a little bit of that opportunity to sink in. And then the person can come back and say, I've had a chance to think about it. I hope you've had a chance to think about it. Maybe you're not as angry now. And I want to tell you what happened. And I want to say that I'm so sorry for what took place. So timing, it's much more sincere. It's much more effective. And in that situation, timing really is everything. And you're right. Sometimes bringing something up to our child in the heat of the moment, not a good idea. So timing can play a role. But the question is, do you bury it, right? So there's a difference between timing something the right way, timing your confrontation the right way, and burying your confrontation so that it never comes up again. Those two are very different things. I'm fully in agreement that you have to pick and choose the right time and the right battle and the right opportunity to state something. You have to be very clever about that, and you know where you stand in the relationship with the other person to figure out when that's the right opportunity. But yes, you do need to figure that out. So I like to say that in general, so far we've talked about one of the three responses that we really have to conflict, and that is what we call flight, to either run away, bury it, right? Or sometimes we'll call it also to freeze, like a deer in the headlights. Like we see the conflict and we just don't do anything, right? We just pause and we let the other person's yelling at us. We just kind of like take it and we move on, right? Because I'm not going to say anything back. Then there's another response, which is a fight response, which is sometimes we get aggressive with the other person, right? We attack the other person. We can also be overly sharing in a way that puts the other person on the defensive. Like, you did this to me, you're terrible, why would you do that? What kind of person are you, right? And that's also a very instinctual part of how we relate to other people. So I saw a nice talk once by a person. He said that, what parts of our brain are going through our minds when we act that way, when we get aggressive. Someone does something and you say, what are you doing? Right? Where does that come from? Huh? It comes from a part of the limbic system. It's called the amygdala, right? And the psychologists call it amygdala hijack. That we let the amygdala hijack what we really want to say, which is like, hey, why are you doing that? Like something like that. But we get very aggressive. That part of our brain is there as a fight or flight response to danger. So when we feel that we're being attacked by somebody, when we feel there's danger about something, that part of our brain kicks right into action. And we act in a very rash, very intense kind of way without thinking. Exactly, totally blocks clarity. That part of our brain was used for when we were hunters and gatherers and an animal was charging at us and we needed to take a spear and slit his head open and that's what that was there for, right? Well, we don't do that anymore, right? So we're living a little bit of a different lifestyle now. So when we let that part of our brain kind of take over, that's when we say things that we regret. Have you ever said anything one time that and you meet maybe a half a second after you said it, you're like, I take it back, I didn't really mean that, right? You allowed, the amygdala hijacked you for a moment, you couldn't control it, it went out, and now you really can't take that back, right? Because that's how the person is going to see you, right? So we have one of those three responses to conflict: fight, flight, or freeze. And none of those are going to help us to be able to navigate a conflict in a healthy way or to handle a confrontation in a way that's going to get us to where we really want to get to, which is repairing the relationship or at least seeing where the relationship stands. Maybe the relationship is not, maybe we have a false sense of what this relationship really is, right? Have you ever been in a friendship with somebody who you've been better friends with them than they were with you, right? You've invited them over to your house, they never invite you back, right? You think the relationship is one thing, they think the relationship is something different, right? But you're so desperate for that affection from the other person that you invite them over time and again, and they don't invite you back. And you really want to say, like, how come I'm not getting invited back to your house? But you're nervous to ruin what's going on here, right? You don't want to face that fact that maybe the relationship that you think is going on is not really the relationship that's going on. And you're nervous to hear that from the other person when they're going to turn around and say, yeah, but I don't really like you that much, right? Or maybe they don't say it like that, or, you didn't make my cut. I don't know what kind of phrase you're going to get back, but we're thinking in the back of our minds, I don't want to say anything because I don't want to hear something to that extent back in return from that other person because that's going to crush me. So I'd rather just leave this very odd, strange relationship going on in which I'm doing all of the inviting, the other person's stomping on my face, and whatever, we're just going to leave it, right? But that's not healthy. That's not something that's going to get us to where we want to get to. So I'll teach you a phrase that psychologists use that I think could really be a critical idea in how we navigate these problems. It's called compassionate curiosity. Compassionate curiosity. So what do you think that means? What does it look like? What are we trying to do? What do you think? Trying to develop the relationship. We're using compassion. So we're blocking that amygdala hijack from attacking the other person and yelling at them and going aggressive at them, right? Because saying to them, that yelling, what are you doing? What kind of person are you? What are we thinking, right? That's not compassion whatsoever, right? So we want to have that compassionate opportunity to be curious, to ask them a question, right? To say to them something to the extent of not, what are you doing? In that yelling voice of, tell me what you were thinking in that situation. I had a hard time with this that you did, tell me what happened, right? All of a sudden the person that's a much more, I'm really asking a question because I really want to know what the other person was thinking and what they were doing. I want to get to understand their perspective. And the minute somebody asks you a question where they want to understand where you're at, instead of having what we normally do when someone confronts us as a defensive response, all of a sudden your guard is put down, right? You back down and say, let me explain why I did what I did, right? And so now all of a sudden, and if you feel the other person really wants to know that, so then you can now open up what is really a healthy dialogue. So I'll give you a very simple example. Someone's having a wedding and you don't get invited. You really think you should be invited, right? Think you make the cut, but you didn't. No invitation came. What do you do? Huh?
That's not a good
What would we all, is that a good example? See, maybe it's just the perfect example, but we don't want to talk about that example, right? What do you do? Okay. And what do you do with the fact that all you want to do is rip that person's head off when you do that, right? I mean, in the end of the day, we're being very real here at this moment, because that's why I brought up the example, because we're being very real. The whole time you're like, Mabruk, about by you, and you're going, right? You want to tear the person's head off, right? Huh? Okay. Yeah, but sometimes I'm going to say something very weird from a rabbi's perspective. You can pray all you want, it's not going to help you, right? Hashem, help me. No, this person didn't. I'm angry. I'm angry, and I feel taken advantage of. I feel hurt. What do I do? What do I do in that situation?
Why is it exciting you so much? Because everybody thinks they're number 11 when people are only number 10. And you're really number 22.
It's a great way of phrasing it. I never heard anybody say it like that. Everyone thinks they're I think I'm number 4. I don't think I'm number 11. Why did they just include me? Okay.
Should look yourself internally, why is this thing so much? Am I as close to this person as I thought I was?
Okay.
Maybe you set your own
Right.
perception of the relationship.
Right.
Or maybe you see maybe you don't have enough indication.
Right. So here's an interesting. I'm with you. We're doing it very good. Well, let me ask you a question. Oh, God forbid I didn't bring it up. I'm sorry. No, please not. No, but let me ask you the following question. Have you ever had a situation where you weren't invited to something? You harbored that feeling. Then, I don't know, 6 months later, you made something, right? And you realized you couldn't invite everybody. And then the light bulb clicked for you, right? I'm saying, but in other words, for 6 months, you harbored animosity towards person X for not inviting you to something. And because the whole time you really couldn't understand, you never made anything before. And then your kid gets engaged and you have to make your own list, and you start, all of a sudden you're like, now I understand what happened, right? Now the light bulb clicks for me, right? So you're in it. So that's something. Right, they haven't had anything to invite somebody, so they're not sensitive to that. They can't empathize. They can't empathize with the situation that person is in. What? So one option is that we need to start recognizing that part of it. That's the reflection part. That's the part that I read to you about the Rambam, that when that happens, the person's got to look inward and figure out to say, Melamed kav zechut, right? What's the benefit of the doubt on that situation? I'm sure the person didn't mean it intentionally. It wasn't to slight me. But inviting me might have had to invite 40 other people that are in my circle that I couldn't invite as well. And maybe they're limited invitations. Maybe the other side didn't give them that number of invitations. I don't know. I don't know what it is. Maybe, but those are types of thoughts and that would be great if the person can bring them to that. That's what we should try to work on from a personal standpoint. But let's say that doesn't work for you. Does anybody advocate at all for asking the person? Zero, none. Never. Oh, I don't like that. Oh, I don't like that. I don't like that. See, that's a passive aggressive approach that I would never. That's the jab at the person. I would not. I could see where you're coming from with something like that, and I could see myself doing something like that. But that's worse, in my opinion. That's calling a friend in that situation. Okay, so my point is, if you don't care, but this person cares, and they can't get over it, and they're sitting there for 2 weeks. Let me just finish. They're sitting there for 2 weeks saying to themselves, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. And the other voice is saying, it's not okay, it's not okay. And they're trying and they're working and they're bending and it's not. I'm saying, possibly, maybe this is a little much. I'll give it, yeah. I'm thinking. I don't know. Again, I don't want to, what am I thinking? I'm saying it could be presented in a way where not, I feel, where a person calls up and says, I understand you're making a very wonderful function and I wish you all the best luck. I really thought we were close and I felt bad that I didn't get an invitation. Tell me, what happened, right? Never happened. But are you really? Go ahead. Okay, yeah.
We started to wedding and like you were upset with me or whatever. And I was like, oh my God, like no, I must have forgot. I'm like, oh, you think like that?
Were you long? Yes.
It was awkward. But how do you feel about it now? Would it have made a difference had they said it before the wedding as opposed to after? Right.
You're all caught up and some people are just like, no, whatever.
Right.
When it's happening.
So I could see where this is a very tense example. I'm not suggesting that we should start going around town and starting to call every single person who doesn't invite us to something. I totally recognize that. Yes. By the way, and I was about to bring that up. The truth is, I was about to bring that up. What happens if the person says, "What are you talking about? I did invite you," and now the person that now you're taking a big risk when that happens because maybe the person did, maybe the person didn't, right? But imagine now for 6 months you thought the entire time, this person doesn't like me anymore. I can't wait for the next thing that I get. I'm scratching that person so far off my list. I can't, forget about it. And you have all this animosity that is pent up with you, and it's misrepresented. It's misplaced because the person doesn't think that way at all, right? So the point that I'm trying to illustrate is, I don't know if we act on this, and I realize it's an incredibly complicated, very deep-rooted, very, very difficult situation to navigate. You're right. I don't want to ruin that other person's simcha. I don't want them to have to think about it. And so all of those things maybe point us into the direction of, I need to work on it myself. But at some point, if that's not working for the person, and maybe it's not an invitation case, maybe it's something else, right? The only way a person can overcome, the only way a person could repair, the only way a person can get closure is by saying something, is by being honest, right? And it doesn't have to be against the person. It's like, I just want to know where we're at. I'm fine if you didn't feel like that I wanted to be invited, but I felt that way, and I hope we're okay, right? And the other person can say, look, I apologize. It wasn't anything against you, like you said. I was limited to this and that, and I only had a certain. Okay, no problem. But now at least it stings. It bites. It might take 3, 4 months, years to get over it. But at some point or another, I feel like we had the conversation. We got it out. In the back of my mind, it's not, did they, didn't they, was it, wasn't it, can it, maybe. And that to me is much more lingering in terms of frustration than anything else. So like I said, it might not be that this is the type of example, because obviously it's very sensitive and it depends on a lot of different circumstances. But maybe we could transport this idea into some other example that we may be holding back, where in the end of the day, if it's eating up at the person inside, the other person might not even be aware of something. How many times do you confront somebody on something and they say, really? I didn't even know. And if you didn't say anything to the person where they didn't even know about it, there would be nothing left, right? I'm not talking about invitation to wedding now. I'm talking about anything, right? Somebody, somebody said something about you, or it gets back to you that somebody said something and really they didn't say it. I never said that. That was presented wrong. That wasn't true, right? Let me tell you how it really happened. if you don't make that leap to say something to the person, then it never gets resolved. That conflict never works itself out, right? And there's a way you could do it. There's a way you could do it without, like I said, the compassionate curiosity, where you ask the question or you present it in a way that doesn't put the person on the defensive. I want to understand what happened. And a very good way to do is, by the way, is validation. As you're asking the question, say, I know I've been there before. It's very hard. I'm sure you were in a very difficult position. I'm sure this, I'm sure that, right? If you validate that there's a possibility on the other end of why that person behaved the way that they did, they all of a sudden feel like, okay, I can express myself over here. Maybe it turns out you did something to them first that you had no idea about. Really? I didn't even know that you say to them, why didn't you invite me? And they say, well, you had something 3 weeks ago and you didn't invite me. Really? I didn't remember. You're right. I was the one who initiated. Here I am sitting there going, this person is a whatever. And really, it's me. I was the one who initiated, not them. How would I have ever found that out if I didn't say anything? So sometimes honesty, again, it stings. The confrontation, it hurts. It's really tough. And we have to figure out where we're going to say and what we're going to do. But a lot of times it helps you long term. You feel better about it in the future. Yeah.
I would say that I find that you have to confront these situations when you realize that time isn't here. Sometimes like you're in a conflict with someone, you wake up the next day, let's say your spouse, and it doesn't mean anything.
Okay, so that's a sign to you that it's moving on.
Like really hurting you.
Yeah. Well, every time you bump into that person, it's ruins your day. Your day's not the same. Yeah, 100%. Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah, the Rambam writes explicitly. I'll just give you a couple of highlights from here because, it's 12:10. The Rambam writes that a person, of course, should never publicly embarrass somebody for anything like that. When you're confronting somebody, you should do it with a soft-spoken approach, through questions. Never accuse the person of something. Speak to them. Let them know, I want to do this because I love you, because I care about you, because I value our relationship, so I don't want to feel this way about us. I'd like us to be able to move on from it. I want us to go back to the way things once were, if that's possible. So when you convey those types of sentiments to people, again, at first it's rough, right? But it becomes sincere, and in the long term, people are able to reconcile their relationships and feel better about themselves and the other people. They have less frustration. They have less animosity. Timing 100% is a big factor. The way you say it, what you say, the not putting the other person on the defensive or embarrassing them is 100%. And of course, if you feel like in the end of the day, I can get over it on my own without having to have that issue, then by all means, go about, be the bigger person, as they say. Like I said last week, being the bigger person doesn't mean telling the other person you're the bigger person. That means you're not really the bigger person. But you could say, I don't want this to take up any more of my time, any more of my energy. I'm moving on from it. I forgive the person. I harbor no ill will. And that's something that our rabbis want us to do. Before Yom Kippur, the rabbis say all the time that a person should say, I forgive everybody. I don't hold any grudges against people. We talked about that last week. I just want to make sure that I hit all of the different points that are there. Yeah.
Be very careful, and so it goes back to I really believe in self-reflection, going towards why am I upset about this? Because sometimes people speak up to make themselves feel better and leave the other person holding the bag. So I can turn to Esther and say, you did this, you did that, and even if I say it nicely, even if I feel better, I got it off my chest, and now you her holding the resentment. She's resentful to me, I unloaded. And I think,
Right.
you have to be very careful that
True.
not making yourself feel better. Like this all sounds like you should speak up for ourselves.
Correct.
But what's the end goal? Is this person capable of change? Is
Right.
this person able to fix what I'm upset about?
Right.
If the time has passed and I wasn't invited to the wedding, there's nothing she can do about
Correct.
it now.
Correct. That's why it probably in my example, it probably doesn't pay any purpose to say it later on down the road, unless you still feel like you could say, I should have said something earlier, but I didn't. I thought I could get over it, but I can't. And I don't care about that anymore. I want us to figure out where our relationship is at, or something of that nature.
up with and who is worth
Yeah,
that.
again, if I'll tell you a fascinating statement that Shlomo Melech says, and it's brought down by the rabbis. They say, just like it's a mitzvah to say something when someone can change, it's also a mitzvah to hold your tongue when you know the person is not going to listen to you. So there's no question about that. Just the Torah is telling us you should say something because the hope is that by saying something, the situation will get better, the person will do better, you'll do better, and the situation can be repaired. If you're feeling like saying something is only going to hurt the situation, right? Like we don't go up to each other before Rosh Hashanah and say, Esther, I want to tell you, please forgive me for the time I spoke Lashon Hara about you. I said this and this to that person, right? That you'd have to be crazy to do something like that. What do you mean? You spoke Lashon Hara? What'd you say? Oh, I said this and this. Really? What'd you say? That's only going to infuriate the situation. So yes, sometimes you don't have to let everything out and leave the other person holding the bag, as you said, 100%. My sense, though, is if you do feel like you have a close relationship with that person, or they're the type of person who would want to know about something like that, who would want to feel like other people were not resentful towards them, who would want to reconcile, who would hear something like that, say, wow, I didn't even know, I'm so sorry, or I felt like I had to do this, or at least get I hear the other side and feel like, oh, that makes sense. Okay, I understand. It's not a personal thing, something of that nature. If you have someone who you know is open to listening to that, then I think if the situation calls for it, there's something to do. You have to be very careful, 100%. I don't want to give the impression here that we should all just start saying everything that's on our mind 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You have to be smart with it. You have to know time, place, tone, question. My sense is that if a person is going to unload on someone leaving them the bag, they're not going to say it in the way that we're talking about saying it, really opening up a dialogue back and forth. They're going to do, as you said, unload on the person, throw all the ill feelings. I feel better about myself, and I just made the other person feel like trash, right? So that's not what we're at here at all. In fact, the pasuk itself says, confront your friend, right? So that you could repair. But don't place a sin upon them. What does that mean? Don't place a sin upon them. Don't make them aim you back at you. If you're doing it so that you can, and the other person now has that yelling back at you, so what did you do? You just flipped the script. That was just the psychological warfare. You didn't do anything that the Torah really wanted you to go ahead and do. The purpose is to make shalom. The purpose is to come to a middle ground where people understand each other, and there's a level of reconciliation in what's going on. So I think that's what we have to keep in mind. You have to think about the end goal. You have to treat it sensitively. You have to choose your words very carefully. You have to find the right venue. This requires time and effort. Real reconciliation, real confrontation requires time, effort, and thought. And it's not something that you do simply. If it's really an issue, you have to really work it out. Yeah.
Someone is me and says, I did it to them. And I was like, thinking very well, and then I didn't realize until she said it, that something I was even upset at that she did. We had our words. We totally didn't agree. We agreed to disagree. And some of them very, very close. And then hung up the phone and we was a little still angry at each other.
For sure.
But if that didn't, after that 2 days, we were never even so close, because if that didn't happen, she was thinking what she was thinking. I didn't even realize I was thinking what I was thinking. It would never been spoken about. We would have just went on living like that. And then after we spoke that, even though we agreed to disagree and we didn't meet eye to eye, at least we both got over chance, we both moved on. It took a few days, but then our relationship went even stronger because no one was thinking about it in the back of their mind.
Nobody was harboring the resentment, for sure. Yeah, and then by the way, you can even take a further step, right? Even if sometimes you don't agree in the end of the day, and you understood where the other person was coming from. They said this, they weren't doing something out of the blue, but I don't agree that that wasn't the course of action, I would think, but at least I see it. At least I understand where they were coming from, right?
For a week, it was the dumbest thing that we spoke about it because we were not so happy, but then after that, it was the best thing that we spoke about, so at the end, it does help eventually.
And that's where time comes into play. You have to understand it's not the battle, it's the war. In other words, you have to think about it as a long-term process. Real reconciliation with somebody who you really want to get together is not going to happen in one phone call in 5 minutes. It's going to take time. People are going to have to, like you said, you're going to have to hang up the phone. I'm upset that they said that. I'm going to have to rethink about it. I'm going to have to reflect on it. Both sides have to do real introspection, right? This is hard stuff, right? It harbors all of these feelings because this is hard stuff, but often the most difficult things in life are also the most meaningful things. That's how, in the end of the day, you take this and you say to yourself, this is an opportunity. It's not something that I don't look forward to. It's something that's an opportunity for me. Because in the end of the day, I can grow and I can become a better person as a result of these types of interactions. I can see what I did wrong. I can see what other people did wrong. And I could repair relationships to make them so that I could be the best type of person. If you look at that opportunity, if you look at it as an opportunity, not as a punishment or something of that sort, then a person, I think, could really grow to become a much better individual. And then when you stand in front of Hashem and you think about, how do I confront God? How do I confront myself about my relationship with Hashem? You learn how to use those same tools in fixing your closeness with Hashem, who doesn't communicate directly with you, right? But you can feel, you can sense that you are able to say to yourself now, just like I had someone else tell me what I did wrong, I could also tell myself what I did wrong. I could also look into myself and say, and practice introspection. I know that I need to do better by God. Most people sense it intuitively towards God, but they don't sense it towards their relationships. When you do better vis-a-vis each other, I think we end up growing also in our relationship with Hashem as well. Debbie, did you want to leave us with a final thought? You had something to say, or you wanted to pass?
I think that's what we want most in relationships. But knowing that because of something that I think
No, that's great. No, that's perfect. I think it's 100% true. Yeah. If you want to share, it's only up to you.
Wherever I'm in that situation, and I always ask them, are you doing it so you feel better, so that you got it off the test, or do you really, want to see like a better result and understand each other? Because if it's just you getting off the test, then don't say.
Then you're right. Then you probably have to introspect on yourself and figure out, why is this bothering me so much, and how can I overcome it? You're right. I think that's a good litmus test. It's not. It's yeah.
Based on this, because maybe it's every person different, but I think sometimes I have a hard time when things are said to my children.
Ooh.
And how I can't go and talk to the person who said it about them, but it harbors in me.
So your child is in a conflict with a friend of theirs or with a parent that's in, right?
They'll fight 5 minutes and then they fight. But like the parent sometimes can't. So like, I would love to learn how to.
My daughter is 32 years old and in first grade, a boy punched her in the stomach, and every time that boy's name comes up, and he's a nice kid, very children, nice kid. Every time his name comes up, I go, he punched the in the stomach in first grade. I'm like, Ma.
I need help with that.
30 years ago.
Sounds like we all need a lot. Yeah, 100%. 100%. My daughter got bullied on the bus this year, and it's been a tough road. And she forgot about it. And our neighbors now, we have to see each other and we have to work it out, and it's awkward. And sometimes it's going to be awkward. The question is, are you, kids are kids. They're going to do stuff. Like things are gonna happen. And all of us have motherly and fatherly instincts to defend our kids and protect their honor, because we feel like, you hurt my kid, that's like the worst thing you could do to me, right? So how do we get over that is a discussion that definitely plays on this idea as well. But I think it's even easier to really figure it out, right? I think you already answered the question for yourself, right? Which is, why should I get involved when my kid is okay, right? My kid is fine, so they forgot about it. And if anything, it'll make them better. Yeah, they have to overcome it. This is life. We all had to deal with it. We all had to go through it. So overly protecting your child is only going to suffocate them and hurt them. Right? It's only going to make life worse for them. They have to navigate. I had a parent call me. They had a 9th grader. I'm sorry, we're going very long. I apologize. Right? Should we cut it? I don't know. Maybe we should end it here. Whatever. I had a parent who called me and said, my daughter is in my daughter is having a friend trouble with another friend, And I've called the parent many, many times, to tell them, talk to your kid, talk to your kid, talk to your kid. This kid's bullying my kid. I said, okay, has your child ever spoken to that kid? No, they've never spoken to them. In other words, they've never had a conversation about the fact that they're hurting each other. This is two ninth grade girls, right? These are not 1-year-olds, right? These are 2 ninth grade girls. They're getting 13, 14. They're developed, they're mature. And I said to them, I said, I think you gotta pull back. You have to stop. You have to talk to, if anything, your conversation with the other parent. This is how the conversation with the other parent went. Tell your kid to stop talking to my kid. Tell your kid to stop bullying my kid. And they're gonna get you anywhere? For sure not gonna get you anywhere. That just puts the other parent on the defensive, right? So you have that amygdala hijack right there. Someone hurt my kid. That's my little baby. That's my daughter. That's my this. Nobody gets away with that, right? Call up the other parents. You know, your kid did this, your kid did that, blah, 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 blah. Get your kid in line. Hang up the phone. Okay. Any of that ring a bell? Definitely rings a bell.
Yeah.
But any of that help? It certainly doesn't help in the least bit, right? It doesn't do anything. All that does is put the other parent on the defensive. Maybe you look like a fool because I've had people tell me they had that phone call that the person said, well, did you know what your daughter did? My daughter would never do anything. Oh, really? They also took the thing and they spilled it on the person's head. And that's why my daughter did what she did. So how about that, right? And now you're like, okay, well, now you're left holding the bag, right? You're just trying to transfer the bag to each other, see who's going to hold it. That's not good, right? So I told them, I said, speak to the other parent and say, you know, I know there's something going on with our daughters. They're probably both responsible for this. You know, let's let them handle it and we'll coach them kind of from the sidelines, right? They're probably both, you know, back and forth. Try to give them some advice on how they could talk to each other and work it out. Within a day, the thing was done. Within a day. And the parents went to dinner 2 nights later. They were fine with each other. It's perfect, right? And the person came back to me and goes, Rabbi, it was so simple, but I never thought of it like that. I never thought to do something like that. I said, because you're allowing certain parts of your thinking to cloud your judgment instead of you're so about pride and ego and defending myself, you're not going to really try to get to where you really want to get to, which is you want your kid to be okay. You want to be able to work it out with the other person. Thinking in those lines changes everything. Oh, yeah. And what a life skill you just taught them, right? You just taught 2 ninth grade girls how to handle a conflict with themselves. You're going to do this forever, your whole life, till you're. I mean, I know being a grandparent, you want to just be able to play. You want to, no, I'm not that. As a grandparent, you want to be able to play with the kids. You don't want to have to handle their I did that already with my own children, right? So you want them to be able to navigate those situations for themselves. I'm not going to sit there and be involved with every single petty debate. They have to have the skills and the tools. I told them you're going to see this is better because they're going to develop tools how to handle their situations better. Anyway, we're way over time. I apologize. Thank you so much for listening. We'll continue the conversation. Any suggestions, please let me know.